Tartaria in Asia, Europe, and the Americas is an epic historical exploration narrative that uncovers the mysterious and controversial civilization of Tartaria, a vast empire that allegedly spanned 3 continents but has been largely erased from mainstream historical records. Through architectural evidence, cartographic anomalies, and suppressed documents, this story investigates whether Tartaria was a real advanced civilization that flourished across Asia, Europe, and the Americas before being systematically removed from history books. The narrative follows multiple timelines, the present-day researchers piecing together evidence, and dramatized historical episodes showing what Tartarian society may have been like at its peak. This is a journey into alternative history that challenges everything we think we know about the past, questioning who writes history and what truths have been buried beneath centuries of official narratives.
The evidence begins where all geographical truth begins, with maps. Spread across a library table are documents that should be impossible to ignore, yet somehow have been. A 1754 French map by Guillaume Delisle shows it clearly. Tartaria, stretching across the heart of Asia like a giant claiming half the known world. Beside it, a 1744 British map from Emmanuel Bowen displays independent Tartary and Chinese Tartary as distinct regions with defined borders. A Dutch cartographer's work from 1670 labels the same vast territory, and German maps from throughout the 1700s consistently mark this enormous landmass with the same name, the same boundaries, the same implicit recognition that something significant existed there. These weren't crude sketches by amateur explorers. These were official maps produced by the era's most respected cartographic institutions, maps used for navigation, for diplomacy, for trade, maps that European monarchs consulted when planning expeditions and treaties. A modern map slides alongside these historical documents, and the contrast is jarring. Where Tartaria once dominated the geography of Asia, there's now only a collection of separate nations: Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, parts of China. The name itself has vanished so completely that most people today have never heard it. This is what fascinates most about the cartographic record. Tartaria wasn't mentioned once or twice. It appeared on maps for over 300 years, produced independently by cartographers across Europe who'd never met each other. French, British, Dutch, German, Italian, all their official maps agreed on this vast territory's existence and extent, and then, suddenly, nothing. By the early 1900s, the word Tartaria won't be found on any official map. How does an entire geographical designation, one that persisted for centuries, simply disappear? Cartographic historians examining these documents admit the pattern is unusual. Geographical names do change, certainly, through gradual evolution or obvious political shifts. But the complete erasure of a term this widespread and persistent defies standard historical processes. Typically, transitional maps would exist, showing competing nomenclatures, gradual shifts in terminology. Instead, the record shows Tartaria everywhere, consistently across multiple centuries from multiple independent sources, and then it shows nothing. There's a discontinuity that standard historical explanations struggle to address. The question crystallizes when examining map after map, each one testimony to something that existed or was believed to exist across multiple centuries and cultures. If Tartaria was merely European confusion about the vast Asian interior, why did it persist so long? Why did borders become more defined over time, not less? Why did some maps distinguish between independent Tartary, Muscovite Tartary, and Chinese Tartary as separate political entities, if it was all just vague terminology for unknown regions? The maps don't lie. They document 3 centuries of consistent acknowledgement, followed by systematic erasure. Whether Tartaria represented a unified empire, a collection of allied states, or a shared civilization spanning continents, the cartographic evidence demands an answer to one fundamental question. If it was real, who decided we should forget?
The buildings themselves tell a story that official timelines struggle to explain. Stand before the San Francisco City Hall, completed in 1915, and try to reconcile what the eyes see with what the records claim. This masterpiece of Beaux-Arts architecture, with its soaring dome larger than the United States Capitol, its intricate stone carvings, its precisely engineered acoustics, was allegedly built in just under 3 years, during a period when construction technology was primitive by modern standards. No computer-aided design, no modern cranes, no power tools as we know them today, yet there it stands, a monument to capabilities that seem impossible for its era. Cross the Atlantic to the Palais Garnier in Paris, ostensibly constructed between 1861 and 1875. The Opera House showcases architectural sophistication that modern engineers openly admit would challenge today's builders. Perfect acoustic engineering in every seat, an elaborate ventilation system that maintains air quality without modern HVAC technology, and decorative elements so precise that replicating them now would require advanced laser cutting and computer modeling. The official story claims this was achieved with Victorian-era tools and techniques, yet structural engineers examining the building's framework find construction methods that don't align with the technology supposedly available at the time. But nowhere is the architectural mystery more pronounced than in the so-called temporary structures of the World's Fairs. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair stands as perhaps the most glaring anomaly. Official records claim the White City, over 200 buildings spanning 600 acres, was designed and constructed in roughly 2 years. These weren't simple wooden facades. Photographs show massive neoclassical structures with ornate columns, elaborate statuary, grand domes, and sophisticated infrastructure, including electric lighting, moving sidewalks, and a water circulation system. The buildings featured staff exteriors over iron frames, but the engineering required to create such structures at such scale and speed defies the capabilities of 1890s technology and labor forces. Contemporary accounts describe 40,000 workers laboring on the project, yet mathematical analysis of the construction timeline reveals an impossibility. To build what was built in the time claimed would have required productivity rates exceeding even modern construction standards with contemporary equipment. More puzzling still, many of these temporary buildings showed construction features associated with permanent architecture, deep foundations, sophisticated drainage systems, advanced fire suppression capabilities. The architecture doesn't lie. Something built these monuments to human capability, but the question remains, who and when?
The photographs are undeniable, though their implications remain deeply unsettling. Across dozens of cities on multiple continents, old images from the mid to late 1800s show the same inexplicable phenomenon: buildings buried. Not partially collapsed or damaged, buried. Elegant stone structures with their ground floors completely submerged beneath street level, their ornate first-floor windows now functioning as basement apertures, their grand entrance doors accessible only by descending stairs that clearly weren't part of the original design. In Seattle, photographs from the 1890s show entire city blocks with businesses operating from what were obviously second or third stories, the original ground floors filled with earth and debris. Chicago's pre-fire photographs reveal similar conditions: buildings with multiple feet of accumulated material surrounding their bases, streets elevated well above original door thresholds. Boston, New York, San Francisco, the pattern repeats. Cross the ocean, and the evidence continues. European cities show identical characteristics. Russian photographs document buildings in Moscow and St. Petersburg half buried before excavation efforts in the late 1800s. Asian cities display the same phenomenon. The official explanations vary by location, but share a common theme: gradual accumulation, poor drainage, natural settling. Yet the scale and consistency suggest something more dramatic. Geologists examining the photographic evidence confirm that such burial is indeed possible through natural mechanisms. Liquefaction during earthquakes can cause rapid soil displacement. Massive flooding deposits feet of sediment in hours. Volcanic events bury entire cities under ash. Pompeii stands as permanent testimony to that reality. Tsunamis, mudslides, catastrophic weather events. Nature possesses numerous mechanisms for rapidly burying human infrastructure. The question isn't whether it's possible. The question is scale and timing. Did similar catastrophic events occur simultaneously or in rapid succession across multiple continents? The photographic record suggests a global pattern of burial occurring within a relatively narrow historical window, roughly the early to mid-1800s, based on available images. Some cities document their excavation efforts, treating the buried lower floors as routine historical curiosity rather than evidence of catastrophe. Newspaper accounts from the period casually mention cleaning out the old floors or excavating to original street level, as if this were municipal housekeeping rather than archaeological recovery. Civil engineers studying the excavation photographs note something particularly intriguing. The buried layers often show construction quality and techniques superior to the structures built above them. In some cases, multiple distinct layers exist, suggesting not one burial event but several, with each subsequent civilization building atop the remains of the previous. The underground portions display advanced masonry, sophisticated water management systems, and architectural elements that seem at odds with their supposed historical period. Most troubling are the photographs showing active excavation, revealing intact buildings buried up to their second or third stories. These weren't ruins, they were functional structures, suddenly buried, then forgotten until later discovery during later construction projects. Window glass remained intact, interior walls showed no decay.
It's as if entire city blocks were flash frozen in time beneath layers of earth and mud. Whether catastrophic natural events, deliberate burial, or something else entirely caused this global phenomenon remains unclear. What is clear from the photographic evidence is that it happened broadly, and that the civilization buried beneath our cities might not have been as primitive as official histories suggest. The mud holds secrets that excavation has only begun to reveal. The heart of the Tartarian mystery lies where it always appeared on those old maps, in the vast expanse of Central Asia, where the Silk Road once connected east and west through territories that European cartographers consistently labeled as Tartary. Here, the architectural evidence becomes impossible to dismiss as coincidence or colonial influence. These structures predate European expansion into the region, yet they display the same sophisticated engineering and aesthetic principles found in buildings attributed to much later periods. The star fortresses scattered across Russia and former Soviet territories present perhaps the most compelling enigma. These geometric marvels, perfectly symmetrical, multi-pointed fortifications visible from aerial views, demonstrate mathematical precision and strategic sophistication that official timelines struggle to explain. Fortresses near Kazan, throughout Siberia, and across the steppes of Kazakhstan show identical design principles. Angular bastions positioned for optimal defensive crossfire, precisely calculated angles that maximize field of vision while minimizing exposure, and construction techniques requiring advanced surveying capabilities. Modern military engineers examining these structures note that their designs incorporate principles of defensive architecture that weren't supposedly formalized until centuries after their alleged construction dates. Samarkand and Bukhara stand as testaments to architectural achievement that transcends the simple categorization official history prefers. The Registan in Samarkand, with its massive portal arches and intricate tile work, showcases construction capabilities that mirror, often exceed, contemporary European achievements. The perfectly engineered domes, the sophisticated weight distribution, the acoustic properties of interior spaces all suggest a civilization with advanced understanding of physics, mathematics, and engineering. Bukhara's Kalyan minaret, standing since the 12th century according to official records, displays construction precision that would challenge modern builders. The structure's stylistic elements, the geometric patterns, the proportional relationships, the engineering solutions appear in buildings across continents, from Eastern Europe through Central Asia and beyond. Russian historical documents from the 17th and 18th centuries routinely reference Great Tartary not as mythology or geographical confusion, but as a contemporary political entity. Mongolian chronicles describe vast territories unified under sophisticated administrative systems. Chinese records acknowledge interactions with Tartarian regions as distinct from other neighboring peoples. These weren't vague references to nomadic tribes, but descriptions of organized states with defined territories, trade relationships, and diplomatic protocols. The Silk Road itself takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. Rather than simply a trade route connecting disparate civilizations, it may have been the circulatory system of a unified or allied civilization spanning the continent. The architectural consistency along the route, the caravanserais, the administrative centers, the religious structures, suggests not mere cultural exchange, but shared infrastructure and common engineering knowledge. Even the Great Wall of China invites reconsideration. Alternative analysis suggests portions were built not to keep invaders out from the north, but to manage borders of a complex, multi-regional civilization. Some sections show construction facing southward, arrow slits and defensive positions oriented toward China proper rather than away from it. Archaeological evidence indicates many segments were built during periods when northern regions were supposedly under fragmented tribal control, incapable of prompting such massive defensive investment. The Siberian cities present their own mysteries, sophisticated urban centers in regions officially described as wilderness during their supposed founding periods. Architectural elements in Tobolsk, Irkutsk, and other Siberian settlements match those found thousands of miles away in European capitals, built simultaneously according to records, despite the logistical impossibility of such coordinated construction across vast, supposedly unconquered territories. The Asian evidence doesn't stand alone. It forms the geographic and historical core of a pattern extending across 3 continents.
The European evidence hides in plain sight, embedded in the architecture of capital cities where millions pass daily without questioning the official narratives carved into commemorative plaques. The Reichstag in Berlin, completed in 1894, presents construction timelines that architectural analysts find suspect. 10 years to build such a monumental structure using 19th century technology seems implausible when examining the precision of its stonework, the sophistication of its iron and glass dome engineering, and the complexity of its interior spatial design. Similar questions arise with the Hungarian Parliament building in Budapest, officially constructed between 1885 and 1904, a Gothic revival masterpiece whose structural elements suggest capabilities beyond the era's documented technological capacity. Historical documents throughout Europe reference Tartars not as distant, exotic peoples, but as contemporary political and military forces with whom European powers regularly interacted. Medieval chronicles describe Tartar armies, Tartar diplomats, Tartar trade delegations. These weren't mythological references. They were routine diplomatic and military reports treating Tartarian entities as organized states. Polish historical records document centuries of interaction with Tartarian territories to the east. Hungarian archives contain extensive correspondence regarding Tartar relations. Russian chronicles are filled with references to various Tartar khanates and principalities, described with the administrative detail reserved for recognized political entities. The Ottoman Empire's complex relationship with Tartarian regions reveals intriguing patterns. Rather than simply conquering or displacing Tartarian populations, Ottoman records suggest incorporation, alliance, and administrative continuity. The Crimean Khanate, officially an Ottoman vassal state, retained distinct Tartarian identity and governance structures into the late 18th century.
Architectural elements in Ottoman territories, particularly in regions with historical Tartarian populations, show fusion styles that suggest cultural exchange rather than simple conquest and replacement. Eastern European palatial structures demonstrate characteristics that official attributions struggle to explain. The Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, the Winter Palace, the Peterhof. These showcase architectural and engineering sophistication supposedly imported from Western Europe, yet they incorporate design elements and construction techniques that appear in Central Asian structures predating European contact with those regions. The blue and gold color schemes, the specific proportional relationships, the dome construction methods, these mirror techniques found in Samarkand and Bukhara, suggesting either reverse influence or common origin. Architectural analysis reveals inconsistencies between official building dates and structural evidence. Stone weathering patterns don't match supposed construction timelines. Foundation techniques show methods not documented in contemporary European engineering texts. Interior acoustic designs demonstrate understanding of sound physics not formally codified until later periods. Some buildings show clear evidence of reconstruction or significant modification, yet official records describe them as built whole during impossibly brief construction windows. European maps continued showing Tartarian territories well into the 1850s. An 1855 French map clearly delineates Tartarie chinoise and Tartarie indépendante as distinct regions with defined borders. British maps from the same period show similar designations. These weren't archaic holdovers, they were contemporary geographical references on maps used for active navigation, diplomacy, and trade. The sudden disappearance of these designations in subsequent decades coincided with a period of intense geopolitical reorganization and historical standardization. Cultural artifacts throughout European museums contain Tartarian references that official curation often overlooks or dismisses. Tapestries depicting Tartar nobles, diplomatic gifts from Tartarian courts, trade goods labeled as Tartarian origin, military standards captured from Tartarian forces. These objects exist in collections across Europe, physical evidence of interactions that extended beyond simple conflict with nomadic raiders, evidence suggesting diplomatic, commercial, and cultural exchange with organized, sophisticated civilizations. The European evidence doesn't prove Tartaria's exact nature, but it demonstrates that European powers treated Tartarian entities as contemporary, organized states worthy of diplomatic attention, military respect, and historical documentation. Until, quite suddenly, they didn't.
The American evidence represents the most controversial aspect of the Tartarian investigation, challenging not just architectural timelines, but fundamental narratives of continental settlement and development. The official story describes a wilderness gradually tamed by European colonizers building civilization from scratch. Yet the physical evidence suggests a more complex reality. Photographs from the mid-1800s show American cities with infrastructure that shouldn't exist according to settlement timelines. Elaborate municipal buildings, sophisticated water systems, grand civic structures appearing in regions supposedly inhabited by small frontier populations just decades earlier. San Francisco presents a particularly stark anomaly. Official records describe a small settlement of roughly 200 people in 1846, exploding to a city of over 150,000 by 1870.
The architectural evidence from that period shows not hastily constructed frontier buildings, but sophisticated urban infrastructure, ornate commercial buildings with advanced fire suppression systems, municipal structures with acoustic engineering and ventilation capabilities, residential blocks showing uniform construction standards, suggesting centralized planning rather than organic growth. The 1906 earthquake revealed foundations and underground infrastructure that predated official construction records, buried structures showing construction quality exceeding the buildings supposedly erected above them. The mud flood evidence appears as consistently in American cities as in European and Asian counterparts. Photographs from New York, Boston, Chicago, and Philadelphia show the same phenomenon: buildings buried to their second floors, streets elevated above original entrances, basement windows that were clearly designed as ground floor apertures. Official explanations cite gradual accumulation and street-raising projects, yet the scale and consistency suggest something more dramatic. Some excavation photographs reveal multiple layers of previous construction, each layer showing sophisticated building techniques. World's Fair structures in America display architectural characteristics remarkably consistent with designs found in Central Asian Tartarian sites. The 1893 Chicago Exhibition's neoclassical buildings mirror proportional relationships and decorative elements found in Samarkand and Bukhara. The 1904 St. Louis World's Fair buildings show similar design principles. Official records describe these as temporary structures built specifically for the exhibitions, yet construction details, permanent foundations, advanced infrastructure, sophisticated materials suggest repurposing or renovation of existing architecture rather than new construction. The orphan train phenomenon raises uncomfortable demographic questions. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were transported from East Coast cities to rural areas, officially described as relocating urban orphans to farm families. Yet the scale seems disproportionate to documented urban populations and mortality rates. Some researchers suggest these programs may have served to redistribute existing populations following catastrophic events rather than simply addressing urban poverty. Native American oral traditions across various tribes reference the people who were here before, not referring to previous native populations, but to structures and settlements predating current native occupancy. Certain tribes describe finding existing infrastructure, reclaiming buildings rather than constructing new ones, inhabiting cities already partially buried or abandoned. These oral histories don't align neatly with either European colonial narratives or conventional Native American historical frameworks. The speed of urban development strains credibility when examined against available technology and labor forces, cities appearing seemingly overnight with infrastructure requiring decades of coordinated construction effort. Municipal systems, water, sewage, transportation, installed with a sophistication that contemporary European cities took centuries to develop. Official histories attribute this to American ingenuity and rapid industrialization, yet the architectural evidence suggests an alternative possibility: not building new cities, but reclaiming, renovating, and rebranding existing infrastructure. The American evidence doesn't conclusively prove Tartarian presence, but it demonstrates that the official narrative of continental development contains gaps, inconsistencies, and impossibilities that demand deeper investigation.
The question of erasure proves more complex than simple conspiracy. History, by its nature, is written by those who survive to write it, and the 19th century represented a period of unprecedented historical consolidation and standardization. The same decades that saw Tartaria vanish from maps witnessed the formalization of public education systems, the standardization of historical curricula, and the emergence of nation-states requiring coherent origin narratives to legitimize their existence and territorial claims. Victor's history operates as historical principle, not conspiracy theory. When empires expand, conquer, or absorb territories, the historical narrative inevitably shifts to justify and rationalize the new order. The Tartarian territories, stretching across Central Asia, touching Eastern Europe, possibly extending influence far beyond, represented regions that multiple emerging powers sought to claim during the 18th and 19th centuries. Russia's eastward expansion, China's consolidation of Western territories, European colonial ambitions in Asia, all required historical narratives that positioned these lands as primitive, disorganized, or essentially empty, awaiting the civilizing influence of the conquering power. Colonialism particularly depended on narratives of emptiness and primitiveness to justify territorial appropriation. If Tartaria represented an advanced civilization with sophisticated infrastructure, claiming those territories becomes morally and legally problematic under the international frameworks emerging during that period. Far simpler to describe vast regions as occupied by scattered nomadic tribes than to acknowledge displacing organized states with developed urban centers, established governance systems, and technological sophistication rivaling European powers. The rise of nation-states in the late 1800s and early 1900s created mechanisms for historical uniformity that previous eras lacked. Before public education systems, historical knowledge remained fragmented, regional, diverse. The establishment of centralized curricula, standardized textbooks, and unified historical narratives meant that within 2 generations, alternative historical frameworks could be effectively erased from collective memory. What grandparents knew from direct experience or local tradition, grandchildren never learned because it wasn't in the approved textbooks. The world's fairs present intriguing possibilities as rebranding events. These expositions coincided precisely with the period of Tartaria's disappearance from maps and historical discourse. They showcased architecture remarkably similar to Tartarian structures, then demolished or repurposed these buildings while describing them as temporary constructions built specifically for the exhibitions. Were these demonstrations of current capabilities or elaborate exercises in historical revision, taking existing infrastructure, rebranding it as contemporary achievement, then systematically removing it to eliminate evidence of prior civilization? Mainstream historical explanations suggest Tartaria was merely a geographic designation for poorly understood Asian territories, not a unified civilization. As European knowledge of the region improved, more specific and accurate nomenclature replaced the catch-all term Tartary. This explanation accounts for the name's disappearance without requiring deliberate erasure or conspiracy. Alternative researchers point to the systematic nature of the removal, not just names disappearing from maps, but architectural evidence buried, historical documents disappeared from archives, and entire narratives excised from educational materials. The consistency and thoroughness suggests coordination beyond simple knowledge improvement. The truth likely encompasses elements of both perspectives.
Historical revision operates through complex mechanisms, partly deliberate, partly organic, partly coordinated, partly coincidental. Who benefits from historical narratives? Those in power when the narratives solidify. What we trust as history often reflects what served political and social purposes during the period of historical standardization. The question isn't whether history is manipulated, but recognizing that all historical narrative involves selection, emphasis, and interpretation shaped by present concerns as much as past evidence.
The International Historical Conference in Vienna draws scholars from 40 nations, their credentials impeccable, their skepticism toward alternative historical narratives deeply entrenched. The presentation doesn't promise revolutionary proof or definitive answers, only legitimate questions that mainstream scholarship has systematically ignored. The evidence appears on screen in methodical progression. French maps from 1754, British cartography from 1744, Dutch documents from 1670, German maps throughout the 1700s. Each one labels the vast Asian interior as Tartaria or Tartary, with defined borders, consistent placement, official sanction from Europe's most respected geographic institutions. Then modern maps, the complete absence. Not evolution of terminology, but erasure. I'm not claiming to know exactly what Tartaria was, the presentation states clearly. I'm asking why 3 centuries of consistent cartographic documentation suddenly vanished from our historical record without transition, without explanation, without academic inquiry into the discontinuity. The architectural evidence follows. Photographs of the Chicago World's Fair alongside construction timelines that don't withstand mathematical scrutiny. Images of buildings buried to their second floors across multiple continents during the same narrow historical window. Structural analysis from modern engineers questioning official construction dates based on weathering patterns, foundation techniques, and acoustic engineering appearing before the formal physics were supposedly discovered. Not wild speculation, documented professional analysis raising technical questions about accepted timelines. Timeline inconsistencies appear next. Official building records contradicting each other, construction dates incompatible with documented technology, excavation reports casually mentioning previous structures beneath supposedly virgin construction sites. The pattern of erasure receives particular attention, not just Tartaria's removal from maps, but the systematic nature of its disappearance from educational materials, archives, and historical discourse within a single generation. The response comes swift and sharp. A distinguished professor from Cambridge rises first. Tartaria was simply a European catch-all term for poorly understood Asian territories. As geographic knowledge improved, more accurate nomenclature replaced outdated designations. There's no mystery here, only normal historical evolution. A German historian follows. The architecture you're questioning has been thoroughly studied. Construction timelines are well documented. Your suggestion that Victorian-era engineers couldn't achieve what stands before us reveals fundamental misunderstanding of 19th century capabilities. Just because modern observers find something impressive doesn't mean it's impossible for its era. The harshest criticism comes from an American academic. What you're presenting isn't historical inquiry, it's conspiracy theory dressed in academic language. You're asking us to believe that global powers coordinated to erase an entire civilization from history. That's not scholarship, it's fantasy. The rebuttal doesn't claim certainty or demand acceptance. I'm not asking you to believe in conspiracy. I'm asking why we're so certain our current historical narrative is complete and accurate when evidence suggests significant gaps. The cartographic record isn't debatable. Tartaria appeared on official maps for 3 centuries, then vanished completely. That's documented fact. The architectural questions aren't invented. They're raised by structural engineers and construction experts examining the physical evidence. The timeline inconsistencies exist in official records. I'm not promoting alternative history as fact. I'm questioning whether mainstream history should be considered beyond examination. A French historian, older, thoughtful, interjects. Perhaps the real question isn't whether Tartaria existed as described, but why we're so uncomfortable examining the question. History isn't supposed to be settled, it's supposed to be investigated. The room divides, some hostile, some intrigued, many uncertain. No consensus emerges, no definitive resolution, but the conversation has begun, and that alone represents transformation. The evidence remains on display, available for serious examination by those willing to look beyond accepted narratives. Whether Tartaria was empire, confederation, or something entirely else, the questions surrounding its disappearance now occupy legitimate academic space, however controversial.
The months following the conference bring no dramatic vindication, no sudden academic consensus, no revolutionary rewriting of textbooks. What emerges instead is something quieter and potentially more significant, a growing network of researchers, architects, engineers, and historians willing to examine evidence without predetermined conclusions. The cartographic record remains undeniable. The architectural questions persist. The timeline inconsistencies continue troubling those who look closely, and increasingly, serious scholars admit that dismissing these questions as conspiracy theory may itself be intellectually lazy. The investigation continues, but with evolved perspective. Perhaps Tartaria wasn't a monolithic empire, but a cultural and technological civilization spanning diverse political entities, connected by trade routes, shared architectural knowledge, and common engineering principles rather than centralized governance. Perhaps the erasure wasn't coordinated conspiracy, but the organic result of nation-state formation requiring simpler, cleaner historical narratives. The mud floods and buried cities reflect genuine catastrophic events, natural disasters that disrupted civilizations across continents during a relatively brief historical period, creating opportunities for historical revision by those who came after. The evidence accumulates rather than resolves. New photographs emerge from archives, more buildings half-buried, more construction timelines that strain credibility, more maps showing Tartarian territories. Structural engineers continue documenting architectural features that shouldn't exist for their supposed construction periods. Geologists confirm that large-scale rapid burial events are geologically possible, even probable, given Earth's dynamic systems. The questions multiply rather than converge towards simple answers. What becomes clear is that history itself deserves more humility than it typically receives. The certainty with which official narratives are presented often exceeds the evidence supporting them. Gaps exist in documentation, in explanation, in logical consistency that mainstream scholarship has chosen to ignore rather than investigate. Whether Tartaria represents the largest of these gaps or merely one among many, acknowledging such gaps transforms how history should be approached. The grand buildings still stand in cities across 3 continents, their stones holding secrets that plaques and textbooks don't reveal. The old maps remain in archives, their labels testifying to knowledge that subsequent generations chose to forget or revise. The buried foundations continue emerging during excavation projects, each discovery raising questions that official timelines struggle to answer. The evidence doesn't demand specific conclusions, it demands continued inquiry. Maybe Tartaria was a vast empire. Maybe it was several connected civilizations linked by the Silk Road and shared technological knowledge. Maybe it was an advanced culture that fell to catastrophe, natural, social, or both, leaving infrastructure that survivors repurposed and rebranded. Maybe history is more complicated, more layered, more uncertain than the neat narratives presented in educational systems designed for standardization rather than truth-seeking. What emerges from this investigation isn't certainty about what happened, but recognition of how much remains unknown, unexamined, possibly unknowable. The most important question isn't what happened. The most important question is, are we willing to keep asking? History isn't what happened. History is what we remember. And what we remember depends on who's telling the story, when they're telling it, and what purposes their narrative serves. The Tartarian investigation suggests it might be time to tell history differently, with more questions, less certainty, greater humility about the limits of our knowledge, and deeper curiosity about the evidence that doesn't fit comfortable narratives. The mystery remains. Perhaps that's exactly as it should be.